G'day trendsetters, coming to you today with my long-awaited review of the beautiful Framework Bicycles custom gravel bike. You might be wondering, why is there a hot rod Dodge Challenger hanging out in the background? More on that in a moment. If you're a regular to the gravelcyclist.com website, Gravel Cyclist YouTube channel, or the various social media entities, you'll likely have seen this bicycle popping up here and there. Long story short, this bicycle is the centerpiece of my long-term review of the Shimano GRX Di2 12-speed semi-wireless electronic drivetrain hydraulic braking review coming later. You can also check out details of just this frame and fork, which I cover in greater detail in another video that's linked below or in the little box on screen. What you're seeing here is a completely custom gravel bike constructed from 7075 aluminium, or aluminum if you prefer, then bonded to filament wound carbon fiber tubes. This bike is so far removed from other bikes it may resemble in appearance. Did I need a custom bike? Well, the answer is no. Generally, stock geometry works just fine for me, but there's plenty of riders out there where custom geometry and so forth is extremely helpful, and that's where a small builder such as Framework Bicycles is perfect. Everything can be tailored, from the lugs to the angles, even the tube shapes, and of course, custom engraving or finishing anywhere on this bicycle. To make life simple, I had Jonathan, who you'll meet in a moment, basically replicate one of my favorite gravel bike frames of all time. I simply emailed him the geometry chart, and the rest is history. You might be wondering, who is Framework Bicycles? It is a one-person operation located in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the outskirts of that massive metropolis, Toronto. This operation is about 70 kilometers away from Brampton, where this badass Dodge Challenger Scat Pack was built. Some good stuff happening up there in the Great White North. With that said, now would be a good time to talk about some of the features in this frame, and who better to go over that than Jonathan himself, founder of Framework Bicycles. Here's an excerpt or two from an interview I conducted with Jonathan. The full interview coming later to the Gravel Cyclist YouTube channel.
So the main differentiator between us and most of the other current brands making lug frames is that they're all using 3D printed lugs, predominantly SLS, which is selective laser sintering. That's the acronym for it. So they have a really expensive machine that they put powder feedstock in, and a laser kind of melts it where you need it to stick together. And at the end of the process, you're like Indiana Jones, the archaeologist, digging the part out of the powder bed. And that has a lot of kind of problems metallurgically. You're dealing with something that's molten in one part of it and solid in the other. So you have a huge heat gradient, and you also have very rapid cooling. So your crystal structure is not ideal there. Like a 3D printed part is quite expensive and not that great. So for me, we have a machine shop, and that's what I do. I design and machine complicated components. So I thought I'd make it out of billet aluminum, which is not as sexy as titanium. You know, titanium definitely is the buzzword that's needs to be matched in the bike world, but pound for pound, it's kind of like just as strong. Aluminum is less dense than titanium, so you can make the parts a bit bigger. They'll be just as strong, but because they're less dense, it comes out to the same weight. So the machining also has an added benefit of like really high accuracy. So that's where some of the idiosyncratic design choices on our bikes, like putting the bearings right into the frame, we can do that really without any, it's the same way a hub is built. There's no reason a bottom bracket shouldn't be done the same way. It's just really challenging to do that on a production frame. When you send me your geometry, we plug in your fit data, their handling characteristics, and all the things that kind of define the bike. And your set of lugs is unique to your frame. Like, I don't make two of the same bikes. The question about the carbon tubes, again, we wanted to not just kind of do the same thing everyone else is doing. A lot of pre-preg gets used. So we built a filament winding machine, which means we start with a single strand of raw carbon. It's like there's no epoxy mixed into it yet. And the machine winds it back and forth on a mandrel and we add a proprietary resin system to that. So it's sort of, again, an atypical product in the bike world, but it's used more extensively in aerospace. There are other builders that use filament wound tubes, but a lot of times they wrap it on the mandrel and then they shrink tape it. So they cure it right on the rod that they've wound it on. But that you're basically trapping all the air bubbles and crap that you can't wind a tube without introducing a bunch of kind of micro air bubbles into it. Some people will give me a hard time on social media, like, oh, the accuracy doesn't matter. And it's like, well, it doesn't, a bike doesn't need to be that accurate. But if I want to put out a product that like stands the test of time and is worthy of the price point, you kind of have to care about all those little things. Customer facing, the anodizing is probably one of the bigger things, just because the bikes can now have a different kind of visual palette. The electroless nickel plating we're using before only comes in that kind of off gray silvery color that your frame is. We now have an anodizing setup here where I can control no one cares about my parts as much as I do. So I can control the accuracy because I'm doing only my parts. Like I do a single bike at a time. So your bike has all the tubes in the front triangle round, your seat stays are round, and then you've got the kind of rectangular chain stays. So we're moving to, we still can offer those as an option if someone's very particular about wanting the aesthetic of like a round bike. But what we're starting to do now is play with way more shapes on the tubing. So this is a new down tube, right? And you can kind of see that it's quite a lot flatter. Another major change is the chain stays. So I've increased the height of them quite a lot near the bottom bracket to allow for more bottom bracket stiffness if the customer wants that. And then within here, we can play with different layouts on the winder. And then the more dramatic one is the top tube is quite elliptical now, so relatively flat. And that's to try to help get a bit more front end compliance without sacrificing, stiffness through the handlebars.
Kicking off at the front end of the bike, the head tube is a single chunk of CNC machined aluminium with bearing races machined directly in. This ensures consistent alignment and therefore guarantees longevity with the headset bearings, which is extra important with an integrated type front end that this bicycle features. The custom integrated top cap, designed and produced in-house by Jonathan, routes all the cables cleanly inside the headset and through into the fork and the frame, and in my opinion is one of the cleaner methods of integration. Whilst integration certainly isn't everybody's bag, it's undeniable this is a very clean front end. The all carbon tapered steer tube fork and integrated handlebar and stem are obtained from third-party vendors that Jonathan works with. There are many selections for you to choose from at the time of order. There are forks available with mounts and internalized dynamo routing, and relating to the handlebars and stem, different lengths, different widths, and flare if that's your bag. This handlebar, no flare, regular drops, pretty much a traditional road going type handlebar that I happen to love. On a similar note, Jonathan is working on a frame module of sorts, meaning he has produced a stem that pairs beautifully with this frame in-house. And there is also a seat post in the works. The current seat post is a Shimano Pro Discover unit with the Di2 battery internalized. Another chunk of aluminum, etc. is found at the bottom bracket. Again, precision fitment of the bearing, no misalignment, and therefore an extra long life. Whilst this bicycle is currently fitted with a Shimano GRX 2x12 speed crankset, Jonathan also produces his own beautiful 1x specific cranksets. They're available for this bicycle or any bicycle you decide to order. You can learn more about Jonathan's operation at his website linked below, or his Instagram account, which shows many interesting videos of his production processes as the bikes are produced. The remaining chunks of 7075 aluminium are found at the beautiful seat tube cluster and the dropouts. For questions relating to UDH and this frame, it would behoove you to drop a message to Jonathan himself. Naturally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention those gorgeous filament wound carbon fiber tubes, all of which happens in-house at Jonathan's facility. Stating the obvious, this bike stands out from the crowd. In fact, no matter where I've ridden it, someone always comes over to ogle this frame's uniqueness and beauty, because this bicycle is completely bespoke, completely custom. You can specify all manner of mounting craziness. I, however, went for a more subdued approach with the traditional bottle cages mounted on the seat tube and down tube. They're mounted nice and low, so I can utilize extra large bottles if desired. Perfect for rather warm summer weather riding. Atop the top tube, one of my favorite mounts, the bento box mounts, the feed bag mount. Incidentally, my feed bag is provided by Dark Speedworks. G'day if you're watching, love that feed bag. And for the observant folks out there, I have some material protecting the frame from the top tube bag. I have no desire to muck up that beautiful carbon fiber tube. And the other mounting point, a position I like to call the cow catcher position for obvious reasons. This bike does not have fender mounts, but I'm sure you could specify those. The group set, as I mentioned earlier, is Shimano's GRX Di2 12-speed semi-wireless electronic shifting drivetrain with hydraulic disc brakes. Review coming later. The wheel set, I've been circulating between Shimano's own GRX 12-speed specific carbon wheel set that pairs with this group set and this lovely pair of DT Swiss GRC 1100 wheels, very, very light. Review coming later. This fine machine is the epitome of fastidious, detail-oriented construction in a bicycle, but how does that translate to the real-world riding experience? Well, now that we've covered all of the technical details, I think it's time to learn how the Framework Bicycles custom gravel bike rides. I've never felt the need for custom geometry and so on, and if you caught it earlier, I asked Jonathan of Framework to mirror a personal favourite frame. I'm not going to reveal what the source frame was, but let's just say the geometry is intended to be comfy, but not stodgy slow, and racy enough if I decided to ride speedily across the landscape. Ideally, this frame was designed for 700 by 40 millimeter tyres, but 45s fit with a little wiggle room to spare. Naturally, everything can be tweaked to your wildest dreams. You would be wrong thinking this frame is a delicate and fragile flower. During my first legitimate performance ride on the bike at Stettner's Pay Dirt in Carson City, Nevada, another rider kindly slammed his chunky flat pedal into the drive side chainstay whilst I was slacking off at an aid station. Thankfully, the said incident barely left a mark, one that polished out, whereas a hyperlight carbon frame, well, it could have ended badly with a cracked stay. The Pay Dirt event is a veritable potpourri of terrain surfaces including single track. There's really no perfect bike for the course, but the Framework was perfect for me. I happened to be recovering from a nasty crash that happened just 10 days earlier, and I was nursing 2 fractured ribs and a heavily bruised left shoulder around the clavicle. The combination of 8 ibuprofen and the Framework took care of me all day. From ascending loose conditions to dropping down to lower altitudes, albeit with much more care and caution than usual, it didn't really matter. Yes, I felt bumps and jolts and they hurt like but between appropriate tyre pressure, 700C by 45mm wide tyres, a decent modicum of skills and the Framework, I finished the ride in a non-record setting time, but well enough to enjoy 2 post-ride beers and not crash out for a few hours of napping afterwards. I was expecting this frame to be ultra stiff and noodly at the rear end, but the combination of billet aluminium lugs and woven by Jonathan carbon tubes varying in wall thickness, work in concert to provide a right quality I felt was good for all-day comfort, but not soft enough to be a wet noodle. Jonathan can of course tune each tube for varying levels of stiffness, essentially on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the stiffest, including optional directional stiffness tuning. Really tasty stuff. I provided Jonathan with an open book, no requirements, just build me an all-round great performing bike that won't beat me to death. The round tubes on this now slightly superseded framework are traditional and classy in appearance, but I would surely opt for some custom anodizing and overlays frame tubes if I was to spec this frame all over again. Pretty much the sky's the limit, not something you'll find with a mass-produced bike, and you've actually met Jonathan. I mentioned it earlier, the level of precision on this frame is unlike anything I've seen. You would never catch me saying this ordinarily, a press-fit interface is absolutely at home on this bicycle. Jonathan's own crank spins forever on this bottom bracket, but any compatible crank will do the same with this design. Nothing worse than draggy seals and so on at the bottom bracket on a high zoot frame. Likewise, the same precision for the headset, which is absolutely critical with a fully integrated front end. The only real point of concern I had with this bike, it relates to the seat post binding mechanism. The binding mechanism is part of the seat lug itself. Due to the mega precision of this frame, my Shimano carbon seat post was a tiny bit undersized and would slip. I had to torque the F out of the binder bolt paired with a healthy dose of some homemade carbon paste, aka Florida sugar sand, mixed in with some quality bicycle grease. Jonathan informed me the fixing bolt can be torqued to about 12 Newton meters, which would likely foobar many a seat post. I love everything about this framework bicycle. It's unique, it's bespoke, it's custom for you. It's like having your own piece of aircraft engineered carbon and aluminium, but in a bicycle frame. It's likely to be expensive. Jonathan doesn't disclose prices on his website, but when you compare some of these outrageously expensive big brand carbon bikes and their incredibly boring offerings, I'd buy a framework any day of the week. Why ride the same bike as everybody else? Get something for you. A framework could be for you. So there you have it, trendsetters, my review of the beautiful Framework Bicycles custom gravel bike. Learn more about this bike at the website linked below and on screen. And of course, the Instagram account for Framework also linked below. As always, thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the Gravel Cyclist YouTube channel for real world, no bullshit gravel bike reviews such as this one. Real world, no bullshit. Other product reviews, ride experience videos, and my favorite, general madness. Whatever you do, don't f up and hit the bike. Yeah, as all of it is released to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.